representing here all the Muslims and what Islam is, but it's one take on this tradition that is disputed even from within the Islamic tradition. So as a Muslim scholar, I'm dealing with other Muslim scholars, and it's not always easy. And by the way, sometimes it's easier to talk to non-Muslims than to talk to other Muslim scholars, as you know. So this is one thing. The second thing is, if we want to come to a better understanding of what Islam or some trends within Islam are saying about the concept of tolerance and respect, because I will come to this, it's important to come back to the fundamentals and some of the texts that we can find and get a sense of the global message. So this is the overall message. So this is why I want to do tonight, is to start with this, to start with the principles, and then to get to these discussions that we have and the different trends. And the last thing which is important is, once again, it's not to come to talk about tolerance and the theoretical framework and concepts only as philosophical concepts. Of course, we have to talk about philosophy, we have to talk about these concepts, but at the end of the day, if we are serious about pluralism, if we are serious about the future of our societies, and you listen to what is said today, not only in Europe, because today I live in countries where it's very worrying. It's very worrying. It's, you know, tolerance and toleration and respect and living together, they are not theoretical discussion now or concepts that we can just discuss in such a way. It has to do with our daily life. When we see that populist parties today are so successful to shape the landscape of the political discussions. And as I have been repeating over the last 10 days of my visit in the States, I thought that the United States of America were protected from that. And over the last few months, it's quite clear that behind the scene, you have had a revealing process on the discussion of the community center in New York, on the burning of Quran Day, that fear and rejection and mistrust are part of what is the reality of the American society together. And it's worrying. So we are dealing here with a discussion which has practical impact in our life. So it's really practical philosophy, that it's how do we translate the concepts into our daily life. And this is where I think that there is a connection between the academic discussion and our daily life as citizens and trying to build pluralistic society. And this is where I'm here, not here just to talk about concepts and idealistic visions, but really how do we translate this into reality. So I will end with some views on that. So let me start with the fundamentals and something which is very necessary in our discussion. Why I'm saying this? Because you know, over the last 20 years, being involved in discussions in the West, very often I'm asked about Islam perceived as a problem, you know, with secularism, with violence, with women, and we end up talking about what Islam is not and what are the problems, and not to come to the principles. So I want you to do exactly the opposite with me today. It's just what Islam is saying and what kind of verses and references we find that are also shaping the Muslim minds and the Muslim tradition before the Muslim minds, and then, of course, the understanding. If we come to the text, there is something which is, if you go crossing the board from the Sunni and the Shia tradition, and within the Sunni tradition or the Shia tradition, whatever is the trend, and by the way, it's not only two trends, the bad and the good Muslims. So this is a colonizing way of dealing with the Islamic reality. We got that under colonization. There are the good and the bad Muslims. The good are with us and the bad are against. And then we have now this binary vision. All the Bush rhetoric was based on that, the good and the bad. You are either with us or against us. So my answer to this, no, I'm sorry, I'm against the people who killed in New York, but I'm against your policy. So I'm against both. So it's not either or. But here we have this understanding here that crossing the board, you will find something which is the essential principle of Islam, and it's important to start with this, which is the oneness of God, called the Tawheed. Why I'm starting with this? Because the oneness of God is the principle connected to the oneness of humanity. And with the oneness of humanity that we have in the Islamic tradition, there is one verse that is always quoted, and we can find it, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We give dignity to human beings. So the first status here, which is important because it's the equal reality in the dignity of human being beyond the fact that you are Christian, Jew, or Muslim, or it's the dignity of the human being. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ is just human beings are specified here out of their dignity. And this is something which is coming with the relationship with the one God. The oneness of God, the oneness of humanity, and the dignity of every single human being. We should start with this because behind the discussion about tolerance is not only do you tolerate me, but what do you think about my humanity? The fact that I am a human being. Am I more or less a human being than what you think? And you will see that all the discussion that we had on the colonization, implicitly we had this discussion about the status of the other as a human being or not. And I can tell you something that sometimes when I listen to some of the media coverage about the fact that Afghani people or Iraqi people are killed, it's as if their blood has less value than our blood as American or as European. And behind the discussion is, do you give the same value to the human being we are talking about, beyond the fact that they are from Pakistan or they are from Afghanistan? It's a serious matter when we come to this behind the discussion. Now we are facing something which was just unbelievable with the flood in Pakistan, where people were explaining why there is no such a mobilization to come to support the Pakistani people, because the perception is that the Pakistani people are supportive of the Taliban Muslim extremists. So to help them, it's as if the fact that they are perceived as such is diminishing their status as human beings. Think about it, because it's a serious question here on the philosophical ground is, how do you deal with the people? So the starting point of the Islamic tradition is to say, one humanity equal in dignity. So this is the problem, the first principle. But there is another principle that we find also as one of the signs of God. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, we find that in the Quran, خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. He created out of you a spouse. It could be a man and a woman. It's not a woman for the man. We don't have this in the Islamic tradition. The rooted tradition is not that. Is he created out of you the other. So a woman for a man and a man for a woman, according to the Islamic tradition, in order for you to find peace. And he created between you love and mercy. And this is the first dimension of diversity. And it's based not on only the recognition of the other human being, but with the principle, the feeling. And this is something which is important. You are not going to solve the problem of toleration only on principle. You should understand that there is something which has to do with the rule and the feeling, because sometimes a law that is saying that we are equal before law could be misinterpreted or enforced in a way which is not really equal because of the feeling and the mistrust that you have towards people. So here there is something in this verse that is referring to something which is connecting you to the other. Two things. Love as for your quality, and mercy as to bearing your weaknesses. So this is something which is important. And by the way, it's always good to get this when you are married and when you are with a wife or a husband. Just love him or her out of his or her qualities and show mercy for his or her weaknesses. That's a good way to keep your couple united. But this is principles and feeling and spirituality. So it starts with this, and then you come to a second stage coming from the Quran, helping us to get a better sense of what is God's will with his creation. And there is something here that is very often quoted by the Muslims. And it's important not only to quote it, but to understand it. وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. If God had willed, he would have made you one community. It's a very important verse because it means that from the very beginning, God's will is not for us to be all the same. There is nothing in God's will, according to Islam, which is imposing uniformity. You may hope to get unity, but you should understand that it's God's will to have diversity. If he had willed, you would be one community. And here, it's important to come with the understanding that it's not only because, once I was referring to this verse, and someone said, yes, but it's about diversity in colors and races, because there is also in the Quran, اختلاف ألسنتكم وألوانكم, that there is a diversity of colors and languages. So he was saying, yes, in Islam you accept the fact that there is a diversity of colors and culture, but not the diversity of religions, which is wrong. Other verses, وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ لَآمَنَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ كُلُّهُمْ جَمِيعًا أَفَأَنْتَ تُكْرِهُ النَّاسَ حَتَّى يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. In Arabic, I translate, if your Lord, your educator, had willed, all the people on earth would have believed. Is it then to you to impose on two people to believe? Look at that. It's about religion here. So meaning by this that you have no power to impose on two people to believe. So it's a diversity in color, it's a diversity in culture, it's in diversity in religion. So, and meaning by this that the oneness of God with the oneness of humanity is based on God's will in what has to do with diversity. He wanted this diversity in every field, and religion, it's part of the whole understanding. So, why it's important? Because when we speak about tolerance, you may think we are talking about goodwill. But in fact, behind the concept of tolerance, there is a concept which is important, which is the concept of power. There is no tolerance without thinking about power, because it's really about, I may have the power to remove you from the picture, but I'm going to tolerate you, or to suffer your presence. I will come to this. But the point is this one, is that when you come to the principles, and this is sometimes what we have to say to Muslims, if you want to be heard by Muslims, is to refer to verses, say, look, this is what is written, is that this is God's will, that there is a diversity in all the dimensions, cultural, religious, and also in the way the people believe or not. Adding to this, because he wanted the people to believe or not to believe, you have no right to impose on two people to believe or not. You are not here to convert the people. And this is why we have in the second surah of the Quran, La ikraha fi din, no compulsion in religious matter. This is the general statement, which means that here we have to respect the freedom of the people. Does it mean that the Muslims in history always respected that? No. Of course, that sometimes they impose, they attack, of course, Muslims are human beings, and it happened in situations that they acted in contradiction, as we have still now, that in some, Muslim majority countries, for some minorities or religious minorities, they cannot even, practice their religion. And we have to be self-critical on saying, how come we are talking about religious freedom? We come to the States, we ask for our rights, and in Muslim majority countries, we are facing some discriminations, and no one can deny that there are discriminations towards some Christians in some country, and even I was critical of this, and this was in a book that I wrote with a Christian professor 20 years ago on what is happening in Saudi Arabia. When you have a government asking Christians to come to work and telling them that we don't want to see you praying, and we don't want a church, and we don't want to see anything. And we speak about diversity. So this is a discrepancy. This is something which is problematic in the way, and this is why we have to be critical, and this is where the text could help us to come to a better understanding. But now this diversity is a reality, and this is God's will coming from the text. But with diversity, there is another dimension which is important, because diversity could be an asset, but it could be a problem. How do we deal with this diversity? It would be more simple for all of us to be the same, or to live with the same religion. And this is where you have something which is another set of verses that are quite interesting for us to understand the concept of tolerance in Islam, which has to do with the relationship between groups. وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لَفَسَدَتِ الْأَرْضِ. If God has not put a set of people against a set of others, the earth would have been corrupt. Meaning by this, that this diversity is not only his will, but is the necessity for you to keep the earth safe. Absolute power among human beings is the corruption of the earth. So this is why we have balance of power. And tolerance and toleration has to do